G7 finance ministers and central banking chiefs are meeting in Germany to discuss the economic fallout from the war in Ukraine. German Finance Minister Christian Lindner said that they're hoping to agree on around 14 billion euros in aid to help sustain Kyiv's war effort. Also on the agenda at the two-day summit, how to address soaring global food and energy prices. Earlier today, the UN warned that the war in Ukraine could lead to years of malnutrition, mass hunger and famine. Both Russia and Ukraine are big exporters of wheat, barley and sunflower oil. Well, let's get more now on this summit with our reporter Jona Kalgren, who's standing by for us this evening in Berlin. Good evening to you, Jona. Good to see you. Is a deal for a Ukraine package in sight at the moment, and what could it look like?
Well, listen, I'll explain the problem first of all, and that is that the Ukrainian economy is obviously in severe decline, and it has problems. And that means that the government is currently running a deficit of about $5 billion per month. And that money needs to come from somewhere in order for the government to continue to function, paying, staff and paying government employees and so on. Now, the G7 meeting here is really focused to a large extent on that. And the EU has already pledged about $9 billion, and the US is looking at pledging a similar amount. And that would mean that the functioning of the government in Kiev could continue for several months. Not endlessly, of course. This will mean that they could continue, past the summer at this stage. But it would obviously give them a reprieve, a bit of breathing space, and let them focus on the war and let the G7 finance ministers focus on helping them with funds.
Of course, the G7 then find themselves meeting at not just a difficult time, of course, for Ukraine, but the international backdrop to all of this when we're looking at surging food prices, surging energy prices. Have they been discussing a way to tackle that, and what does that look like?
Well, they have indeed. They have looked at inflation and how that's hitting the world at the finance ministers meeting. And also simultaneously, there is another meeting happening. That's the G7 development ministers meeting and the G7 health ministers meeting. And they are also looking at this particular issue, particularly when it comes to the food crisis around the world. Prices are soaring as a direct, effect of the war in Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And what they're looking at is coming up with a plan where they're coordinating, between the G7 countries and other countries, and also providing funds to focus specifically on that issue. And the goal is obviously to make sure that the crisis that we have now, the food insecurity, doesn't turn into something worse, which would be a hunger crisis where people are starving across the world.